Welcome to another episode of Think Development Out Loud. Today we're joined by Professor Sharifah Sekalala, who's a professor of global health law at the University of Warwick. She's an interdisciplinary researcher whose work is at the intersection of international law, public policy, and global health. She's particularly focused on the role of human rights frameworks in addressing global health inequalities. Her research has focused on health crises in sub-Saharan Africa, international financing institutions, and the rise of non-communicable diseases. She has published in leading legal, international relations, and public health journals. She's here to talk to us today about her current research, which is funded by the Wellcome Trust on digital health apps in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you, Professor Sharifah.
The project I'm going to talk about is a project that has been funded by the Wellcome Trust called There's No App for That, regulating the migration of health apps in sub-Saharan Africa. So this project came about when we started thinking about the huge number of health apps that have emerged, especially in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, and how they promised to deliver so much in terms of healthcare to poor resource settings, largely in the developing world. In some earlier work, we really tried to think about the benefits of these apps as well as the weaknesses that these apps had. And it was clear that they delivered so much. They helped people who had ordinarily not been able to see doctors to see them. They helped to deliver healthcare to rural settings. But one of the things that we were really concerned about was that a lot of the existing research at the moment overestimates its benefits and underestimates the risks of health apps within this context. And in particular, as a lawyer, I was really concerned about the lack of regulation around the movement of data, largely from the global south to the global north. And so we tried to think about what the major problems, around the migration of health data. And one of the things that we're really concerned about is looking at other areas, is ideas around extraction of value, that you have people who are giving huge amounts of health data in return for health services without realizing that this health data can be valuable in any way. And so in the project, we use a concept of digital health colonialism, but we also use it as a methodology where we try and think about digital health coloniality, both as a framework within which to think about the problem of data migration, but also as a way in which we could perhaps think about ways of countering the process. So in terms of methods, we focus on 3 case study countries, so Kenya, Uganda, and South Africa. And the reason that we focus on them is that all of these countries, all of 3 of them, were front runners in the digital regulation space. So both Kenya and Uganda also have close similarities with South Africa in terms of constitutionalism, and that gives us some common legal framework to use. And so why kind of coloniality as a mechanism? So we think of digital health coloniality both to explain the phenomena, but also to think about ways in which you could challenge it. And this is part of broader work that is situated within conversations that we're increasingly having in global health around inequalities that digital tools can produce. So you have really exciting work in South Africa from people like Quet, who try and map digital tools and education and the impact of education. So Nanjala's work in Kenya on democracy, and Abahane's work on kind of machine learning and its racialized and gendered consequences. So we're really interested in tapping into that work, but also in terms of then using the coloniality to help us both understand kind of the process, but also to help us to think about ways in which we can challenge how this migration of data takes place. And so it will then mean that we have opportunities to really think about holding ownership in trust, for instance, and that what that would mean within an African context, so that we're not just thinking about solutions that other countries have produced and really trying to find ways in which we can challenge some of those existing power dynamics, but also existing mechanisms of ownership. And so one of the things that we are really keen to do is really to work with our partners in the Global South. So two of my partners are in Kenya and South Africa, to really kind of radically rethink work that's been done in this field. And that's both conceptual work in terms of thinking about the apps themselves, but also in terms of design work to think about the ways in which we could design health apps differently. So many of the health apps, for instance, that exist have been part of huge health projects. And so they exist as part of that project, the project ends, and in many instances, either they are taken on for profit, or they kind of, that's the end of the app itself. And so we're really interested in thinking about design within the African context and what that means, what the decisions that designers have to make when they're designing health apps, what are the considerations, whether there are ways in which to design a health app within that context that in some ways challenges the status quo while taking different things into consideration. The second thing that we're really quite keen on doing is to really think about data activists as part of the project. And so we are working with a number of civil society organizations in order to create a generation of data activists who start off from thinking about their context and not perhaps other projects, for instance, which start off from thinking about rights to privacy, which are already enshrined in kind of some sort of Western-centric context of human rights. And so that's a really huge part of our project. And then the third thing that we're doing methodologically is really to think about ways in which African countries can collaborate in order to try and find mechanisms of data governance that apply to their context. So one of the things that we were really struck by is the way in which most data governance mechanisms are largely exported from the global north. So we have quite a number of them that come from the GDPR, for instance, and are really kind of exported lock, stock, and barrel into a sub-Saharan context. And so we are really keen to experiment with ways in which we could have new data governance mechanisms within the African context. And so in terms of challenges, in some ways, we faced a number of challenges in terms of getting this off the ground. I think there are two main challenges in a project such as this. So the first one, I guess, is the technical, is the sense that data is considered something that is foreign to this space. And so it's really kind of thinking about whether that technical expertise exists, where it has come from, and helping people to really kind of radically rethink a lot of this technical expertise, which many of them have gone abroad in order to gain this expertise, has been really challenging as part of the project, where we try to get help to get app designers in order to rethink the process. And so I think that that's kind of been a really challenging process, really, to think about ways of doing it differently. I think the second thing that's been challenging is to trying to set up lots of collaboration agreements with huge numbers of stakeholders. So lots of funding, although funding agencies are really keen to try and decolonize projects. I think they have also, I think they really struggle in terms of the mechanisms of how that decolonization will work once the project is being implemented. And so we found that when we are signing collaboration agreements, for instance, that the processes themselves look very colonial in nature, because we as the partners in the North are asking for huge amounts of information from partners in the South. We are asking for work to be done, for instance, and payment to be given afterwards. And so there is a sense in terms of trying to really rethink some of these terms in which collaboration agreements take place, and the ways in which we could perhaps collaborate more meaningfully in a way that honors the decolonial intent of the project.